Lou Pulsifer here with a chess exercise for you to do. I want you to take chess, which most people know how to play even if they're not regular players, and use the 9 structures I've designed to modify it. In each case, take one of those 9 structures and change something within that structure. And then try the game out, play it, or get some playtesters to play it and see what effect it has, because frequently you'll find it's not quite the effect that you imagined, especially if you play it several times. You're going to run into things you didn't anticipate, because that's the nature of game design. Now I'm going to give you some examples, but in most cases those examples will not be tested. So who knows how good they would turn out in practice. The first structure: theme, atmosphere, history, story, emotion, image. Well, someone recently, for Kickstarter, added Cthulhu imagery to a traditional Viking game, Hnefatafl, a game that we don't really know the rules for, but is something like Nine Men's Morris, a more elaborate game than tic-tac-toe, but not nearly as elaborate as chess. And yet, in that Kickstarter, it was quickly funded because of the Cthulhu imagery. Then we have another example, Battle Chess, which is a game from the 1980s. You can look it up in Wikipedia, where the chess pieces animated and fought each other. That was more or less an atmosphere. Chess being an abstract game, it's not easy to think up changes in this first structure, but see what you can do. The next is player interaction rules and number of players, and the obvious thing here is chess for more than 2 players. And there have been commercial 3-player and 4-player chess games, and most of them didn't really work very well because of turtling. That is, the best thing to do in 3 or 4-player chess is to sit and let the other players kill themselves. Think about it. Chess is a game where you don't gain pieces generally, you just lose pieces. So let the other guys beat themselves up. And there are some ways to get around that, but it's fairly limited. Another way of this, working with this structure, would be whenever there's an attempt to capture, the players play rock, paper, scissors. And they want to get the best 2 out of 3. But the attacker automatically gets 1, so that means that the defender has to win 2 out of 2 in effect, which isn't going to happen a whole lot of times, but it'll happen about a quarter of the time. And then the failed attacker would have to go back to their origin, and that would be the end of their move. Make for quite a different game. Objective and victory conditions. Well, how about the first player to reach the opponent's first row with a piece that survives the next opponent move wins? It might be too easy if it was just the first to reach the opponent's row, but reach the opponent's row and survive, that's more difficult. Another possibility, maybe the first player to take 6 opposing pawns wins. Who knows? Data storage, which includes the board. Well, some commercial games of chess use a hex board, or they use a 3-dimensional board, Star Trek or Star Wars chess. But it's not so easy to think of things beyond that. Sequencing. Well, simultaneous movement is the obvious thing, and I'm pretty sure this has been done, but there's a lot of details to work out about exactly how. What happens when pieces cross paths? What happens when 2 pieces attack each other, and so forth? Another possibility is to let each player move 2 pieces at once, but for the very first white move, only let white move 1 piece. And who knows how that would work out? Some things you just have to play test. Most things, really. Movement and placement. How about Bobby Fischer's variant? You scrabble the pieces in the back row for one player and then have the other player's pieces match. So you could have the king in a corner. You could have the king in one corner and the queen in the other opposite corner. You could have two bishops that were both on white or both on black. Bobby Fischer thought this was a good idea because then players would have to figure out what to do instead of relying on the studies of centuries, but he didn't make much progress with that. How about start with no pieces in the back row, and the players place them one at a time until they fill the row, and then you start playing normally. That would be really interesting. And it'd be really difficult to analyze because there'd be so many different possibilities, because the players could choose different locations for their pieces. And of course, the more obvious one is to change the movement pattern of one or more pieces, which Fantasy Chess does. Information availability. The traditional Kriegspiel chess. You have two players, one just has his white pieces, the other just has his black pieces. They can't see each other's boards, and as a referee who can see both their boards, but they can't see the referee's board. He keeps track of where all the pieces are. When a player moves a piece such that it interacts with a piece of the other player, the referee tells him. Or how about, instead of using normal chess pieces, use discs that say what the piece is and put them face down. And the identity of the piece isn't revealed until it's moved. And players set up their forces as they wish. Conflict resolution. Well, the obvious thing is to add dice. And you could have Dungeons and Dragons style dice where a pawn's a d4, a knight or a bishop's a d6, rook's a d8, and so on. You'd have to decide what the king was. And when somebody attacked, both sides would roll a die. The attacker would add 1, or possibly even 2, and there'd be a comparison. And the higher would win. So the defender could win and kill the attacker. What would happen with ties? Well, if ties go to the attacker, maybe you'd only add 1 and not 2 to the attacker's roll. If ties are re-rolls, maybe you'd want to add 2 to the attacker. You'd have to try it out. If you only have 6-sided dice, you could have the pawn roll 1 die, the knights and bishops 2 dice, and so on. That gives you different odds as to what happens. And you can calculate those odds. Economy. Well, how about designating 8 squares on the board that are valuable for some reason? Then every 10 turns, if a player occupies one of those squares, he gets 2 points per square, and he can use those points to purchase back captured pieces and put those back on the board. You could use the standard point values. And this is one of those cases where you'd really need playtesting to determine the number of turns, number of squares, number of points, and so forth. Now I want you to do the same kind of thing. Play the game and ask yourself how drastically the game's been altered by one change. And then think about that in terms of designing brand new games, that one change can make a lot of difference. You can also do the same for video game, but the problem is you can't test the video game. And testing is the key. No one, even very experienced designers, can anticipate all the things that are going to happen from even relatively minor changes. So you've got to play the game. There's no substitute for playing the game.